Well, hey, Marty, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here. Looking forward to our conversation together.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
good. You're doing a really exciting sermon series here and study through the month of November, and I know this from prep too. We just were talking about this in the office this week. So much stuff ends up on the office floor when you write a sermon, right? You write a sermon and you pack it with as much stuff as you can without losing people, but there's always stuff left. And so you wanted to do a sit down here and maybe just chat about some of the stuff that you didn't get to on a Sunday morning, but you still thought was important for this series. Is that right?
Absolutely. This book that we're looking at through this whole series called "Turning Ourselves Inside Out," it is just packed with wonderful ideas. It challenges us as a church, as individuals. It helps us to understand where God is at work in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, there's so much there. There's so much there. To try to pack it into any kind of sermon series is almost, well, it's laughable in that sense. And
Yeah.
so eh, these things as well need conversation, So I'm hoping that our conversation today will spark conversations around small groups within the church, people who are gathering in different places, households who are gathering for a dinner. So just sparking some conversations about who we are, what it means to be followers of Christ. Where is God in all of this? The world is such a difficult place to live in right now, it seems. So where is God? And how do we respond to the power of God in our lives?
Mm-hmm.
All of those are crucially important for us today.
Yeah. Well, I'm really excited. I found out you were reading this book a couple weeks ago, so I dove in. I really liked it a lot. It had some really cool insights. So let's jump in. You did your first sermon sort of in this series on November the 5th.
Yes.
And the focus of that was around hope, right? Hope for the future. It seems like, and we've had this conversation, and I know you and I have had it many times outside of just the two of us. It seems like the mainline church is in a bit of a decline. It seems like there's a lot of people trying to figure out what's going on. And sometimes it feels like there's really no hope for the church of the future. I know we've both been a part of those conversations, but I think both you and I and this book see this a little bit differently. So like why did you choose this and where do you want people to see the hope coming next?
Well, it's so interesting, and I think that gets to some of the core that's within this book. So a lot of times we manufacture our own hope,
Mm.
right? Sometimes even though we say that we believe in God and that we're followers of Jesus, sometimes, especially within the mainline church, we try to define God in so many different ways. We get so sensitive about concepts of God and definitions of God and how we see God. And within the mainline church, we can track concepts of God as they change in the pages of Scripture. And yet sometimes as we're defining God and trying to figure out how to present God to people,
Mm-hmm.
we forget that God is a God to be experienced.
Mm.
We forget that God is a reality, a presence in our lives that touches us deeply.
Yeah.
We sometimes just think about God and say words about God,
Right.
and try to find hope in that. And that's what I mean by trying to manufacture our own hope, because we think that if we think about God enough, we'll be able to manufacture hope, as opposed to recognizing that God has moved into our lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's the power of incarnation. I mean, Jesus came down, moved into the neighborhood. God moved into the neighborhood. So God is here, and that living presence of God, that's where we can find hope. It's nothing that we need to manufacture.
Yeah.
And the authors of this book are so powerful in exploring that as we lean into God, as we experience God, that's where we can find hope,
Yeah.
not in ourselves.
Why do you think we struggle with that? The idea of experiencing God versus just talking about him or trying to understand him. Where's that human piece that sort of is the mix? Cuz I know I've had moments like that too.
Yeah, it's interesting, and The book doesn't get into that, but the book reminded me of a series of conversations I had with someone the other day, or not the other day, a few years ago, but almost gave a little bit of a history lesson, right? It's because people over the years have always asked, where is God? I mean, an extension of the Bible in terms of conversations about God after the Bible was written are always around, where is God? And in the Dark Ages, for example. So years and years ago in the Dark Ages, people saw God in everything. If there was disease, if there was difficulty, if there was power, or that was kind of like negative power or demons or spirits that were horrible spirits. If there was good, if there was joy, if there was happiness, that was God. And so even in the medical field back in the Dark Ages, if there was a disease, well, that was an evil spirit that needed to be let out of a person. So they would cut the person and bleed the person, thinking that would allow the evil spirit to come out. Then came the age of Enlightenment, okay, where they recognized, no, it wasn't evil spirits. Almost by accident, the scientific community found out about germs, right? And they understood, okay, it's not evil spirits, it's germs. And so that sense of enlightenment, oh, okay, so that's not God or the devil, but that's actually the difference between healthy bacteria and unhealthy bacteria and germs and the role, so that area of or that age of enlightenment was really, really quite helpful. And then came the age of modernity, where science seemed to have all the answers, and that's where the authors pick up. They talk about scientific materialism, where one of the issues today is that the mainline church has been influenced by scientific materialism. What you see and what you can prove and what you can demonstrate is the whole sum of reality. That's it, right? And the church has been affected by that. We've all been affected by that. There is, however, a movement towards what some call post modernity, and it's almost like we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater. That this movement from the Dark Ages to Enlightenment to modernity, we've forgotten about the presence of God in all of that. But in this age of scientific materialism, the authors refer to it as physicalism, where what you see is what you get. That's it. It's proven, and so it exists. We've forgotten about the powerful experience that people over the years have had about something that is within us but beyond us, something that is part of us but still outside of us. This sense, this power, this presence, this beauty, this love, this care, this compassion that we call God, right? And the church, when we forget about that, we kind of lose hope.
Yeah, it's interesting how the pendulum swings, right?
Yes.
The less we understood scientifically, the more we put on God, and then the more we understood about science, the less we put on God. And it seems like now maybe we've swung it to that side, which is, if we're to help fix a broken church or rebuild something that's gotten smaller, well, there's got to be a strategic or a scientific blueprint to such a thing. We're not cutting the body open anymore because there's enough books on this. But I think it's really interesting what you mentioned is that people can't, like you said, throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yes.
You can't go all the way. You have to balance, strategy and understanding that there are certain things we can do, but not forget that God's actually at work.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So again, the authors say this, and it's something that I think a lot of preachers within the mainline church need to think about. I can remember a number of years ago, I was out on the golf course with a buddy of mine, and we were talking, and both of us are more progressive, more liberal-minded, and we were having this conversation about God. And it wasn't that I didn't believe that God exists, but I did say to him, you know what? If at some point science did say God doesn't exist, I said, I'm not sure that my preaching would be a whole lot different, because we're talking about the values of inclusion and love and care and compassion, and those values are really, really powerful. And he said, that's the problem with the liberal church. The liberal church doesn't need God. And that was the turnabout for me.
Right.
That was the
Interesting.
turnaround for me. Because as a preacher within the mainline church, I need God.
Right.
I need God. And that's what this book talks about so powerfully. You know, that the liberal church is almost forgotten, because we want to define God. We want to make sure that God is politically correct. And so we think about God and how we forget about that experience of God, that we desperately need God, that God is actively at work in the world.
Yeah.
So instead of that, we come up with programs and we figure out, you know, oh, if we do this, if we do that, it's all about us. It's all about what we think we need to do. It's all about building on our strengths,
Right.
instead of building on God's strengths.
Yeah.
And leaning into the power of that incarnational God who lives and breathes and works within us, that experience of a God of compassion,
Yeah.
that we can, when we open our, Jesus said, open your eyes, open your ears, open your heart, and you'll sense, you'll feel.
Yeah.
That's what the more liberal church needs to do again.
That's really interesting. So where do we start with that? And where, you know, as we journey through this next month or so, where is St. Andrew's on this journey? And where do you hope that it'll go?
St. Andrew's has the reputation, and over the last 50, 60, 70 years, it's been a powerful church. It's been a really, really strong church. Excellent leadership. But right now, I think we're living more in that past and kind of sitting on our laurels a little bit, saying, you know, we did pretty well. And rather than trying to face the struggles and the issues of the day, there's almost a desire. You can see it. You can see it peeking its head out every once in a while. A desire that says, I wish we were back there.
Right.
I wish it was. I wish we could recreate what we had back there. But that's the problem. I wish we could
Right.
recreate
Right.
what we
Sure.
had back there.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
The power of moving forward
Right.
is to recognize where God is working.
Right.
And I believe that God is working within St. Andrews, no doubt about that. But there is more hope in recognizing that God's not just limited to St. Andrews.
Right.
Or the liberal church, or the Christian church, or Christendom, that God is at work in the world, and opening our eyes, opening our ears to see God at work out in the community. Now that's exciting stuff. To lean into a God actively doing stuff.
Yeah.
Now that's where we can find hope.
I think that's a great way to put it. I think a lot of times when we have these conversations, we sit in a lot of rooms, I know we both have, and we say, boy, people say we'd like to get back to where we used to be. And even if that was the feeling and people felt that way, but if people instead said, you know, I really liked the season that God brought us through.
Yes.
I'm really excited for God to bring us through another exciting season. Like that, just like the whole conversation changes just
Completely.
like that, right?
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely.
So how, I mean, we're going to talk about this over the next few weeks, but just a couple of thoughts here as we sort of wrap this first one up. How do we start to do that? What are the tools in the toolbox that we give people? What are the first couple steps that we take to just sort of start that head and that heart change, that adjustment to how we do that?
Couple of, I think, attitudinal statements, changes. First of all, it's not all about us, right? So it's not, and when I say that, there's two levels to that. It's not all about us. It's in the sense that it's not all about creating, quote unquote, a church that serves my needs, a church that I like, a church that I'm comfortable with, a church that meets all the requirements that I want. unfortunately, we live in and have for some time, but people shop around to find the right church for
Right.
them.
Sure.
And to some extent, I understand that. But the attitude is that it's all about me. It's about my needs. And so it's not about us. We are a covenant people, and that covenant is based in this powerful promise of God to Abraham. I will bless you, and I will bless your descendants, and your descendants will be more numerous than the stars in the sky. But I will bless you so that you will be a blessing. Blessed to be blessed. So it's not all about us.
Yeah.
It's about people who need an experience of the love of God, people who are struggling, people who are hurting, how we as a church can offer support to those who are disenfranchised, to those who experience injustice, to those who are hungry, to those who are poor, to those who are lonely, to those who are hurt, to those who are grieving. It's about an act of service,
Sure.
right? So that's the first thing when I say it's not all about us. The second thing when I say it's not all about us is that I don't know about you, but I can't do that by myself.
Yeah.
I've come to understand
Yeah.
that, right? As much as I think I'm a great guy, I'm passionate, I love people, I can't do it by myself. I need God, right? I need the presence of God in my life. I need Jesus. I need the Spirit. And as mainline church preachers, teachers, and people, we need to recognize it's not all about us. We need God. It's about God.
Yeah.
It's about God's world and God's vision and God's kingdom here, God's realm here in this. That's what it's about.